There is one family that personified the American dream. For decades, the story of America revolved around the lives and deaths of its members. At times, in their fabulous lives, they appeared the very masters of time and chance. Their triumphs and their tragedies have touched millions. These are the Kennedys. This is their story. Their political first. Jack, the youngest man ever to be elected president. Bobby.
That's all right. Don't get him excited. This is my first trip to Europe, and I was very excited. I couldn't even sleep last night.
The first American to serve in a brother's presidential cabinet. And when Teddy was elected, the Kennedys became the first family to elect 3 sons to the United States Senate. They brought a family approach to American politics. One for all, and all for one. Politics, the game with the highest stakes, was there to be mastered and won. A way to celebrate the Kennedy joie de vivre. They made it seem, in a world struggling for survival, that anything could be done, that anything was possible. What about setbacks and calamities? After one family tragedy, a reporter asked Brother Bobby if now the Kennedys would give up. He replied, "The Kennedys intend to stay in public life. Good luck is something you make. Bad luck is something you endure." And it was that view of life and death that sustained Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. in his hours of grief. His firstborn, Joe Jr., crashed to his death in World War II. Daughter Kathleen killed in a plane crash. Jack, the president, assassinated in a Dallas motorcade. Bobby murdered in a Los Angeles hotel kitchen. Joe Kennedy, crippled by a stroke, endured the bad. Time and chance had dealt with him and his family in a manner that rivaled the tragedies of the Greeks. Joseph P. Kennedy's grandfather was an Irish peasant. He came to America during the Potato Famine of the 1860s in Ireland. Joe's father was a saloon keeper and a ward-level politician who eventually served in the Massachusetts legislature. Joe would remember to his dying day the signs, "No Irish need apply." But he got a better start than most Boston Irish of his day. He was educated with the elite at Boston's Latin School, then at Harvard. And when he married Rose Fitzgerald, the daughter of Mayor Honey Fitz, it was a union of 2 politically powerful Irish families. With the help of his father and father-in-law, Joe became the youngest bank president in the United States. People took notice of it. That fellow has something, they said. But not the right people. Not the people who mattered. To the Lodges and the Cabots and other proper Bostonians, Joe Kennedy was an upstart. A brash, aggressive, money-making Irish Catholic. Joseph P. Kennedy couldn't join their country clubs. His wife, Rose, educated in Europe, couldn't join the Junior League. His children were not accepted as equals by the offspring of the Boston Brahmins. But Joe Kennedy believed in the American dream. He was out to prove it true. He had wit and charm and brains, and he had luck. During World War I, he became an executive in a shipyard, and there had his first encounter with Franklin Roosevelt, then Assistant Secretary of the Navy. The war over, he charmed his way into a firm of stockbrokers, quickly became a master of the marketplace, and took off for New York and Wall Street after the big money. Here again, he learned and earned, but seemed still to be looking. Then came Hollywood. He refinanced major studios, produced films, met Gloria Swanson, formed a friendship and a company with her. They were together frequently. There was a scandal. And all the while, he kept piling up money. A man of substance as the 20s began to roar, he was a millionaire many times over when they crashed. He had the foresight, or was it Irish luck, to liquidate his holdings the year before the market collapsed. His fortune was safe. The family spent summers on the Cape and winters at Palm Beach. For the Kennedy family, life was unchanged. But Joe Sr. was worried about his fortune. Everywhere there were signs of chaos. The recovery promised by President Hoover was nowhere in sight. Close to 1,400 banks failed in 1930 alone. Soon, 16 million workers were unemployed. Foreclosures and evictions stirred ugly moods. Mobs in Washington. Riots. Upheaval. The rage of the people might bring everything down. He saw Franklin D. Roosevelt as a man who could save it all and set out to help him. Roosevelt needed a solvent supporter, a man of substance, and an Irish Catholic to neutralize his Irish Catholic competitor, Al Smith.
Not to win votes alone, but to win in this crusade to restore America to its own people.
Roosevelt welcomed him. Kennedy contributed $25,000 to the campaign, loaned the Democrats $50,000 more, collected another $100,000 from his millionaire friends. But still, he was an outsider. His money was welcome, but the idealists in the party were skeptical of a stock market operator. When Franklin Roosevelt became president, Joe Kennedy expected to be Secretary of the Treasury. FDR kept him waiting for a year and a half. Kennedy thought he had been taken. Finally, he was named chairman of the newly created Securities and Exchange Commission. A stroke of Roosevelt genius. Kennedy was perfect for the job. He knew all the tricks to catch the tricksters.
Against all enemies.
The SEC established, he resigned to work on FDR's re-election. Then came the real reward for an Irishman from Boston. Roosevelt made him ambassador to the court of St. James.
All right there, boys, it's late.
He loved England. His large family was a source of fascination to the English. Nothing could have pleased Joe Kennedy more.
Just arrived in England after a very pleasant trip. I'm looking forward with great anticipation to my duties here and to renewing acquaintanceship with many old friends. Thank you very much.
But what about the family of 9, Mr. Kennedy?
We're not wishing to add to the housing problem of England and make it any worse than it is. I'm bringing them over in installments. 5, 2, and 2.
Thank you.
Of all he had done, all that he possessed, nothing compared with his love for his family. There were plans for them, especially his firstborn, Joe Jr. Nothing would have struck the path of his children. Everything would be placed at their disposal. What was needed was the proper upbringing, a good education, the will to win. Failure was not tolerated. Destiny must be actively pursued. If you used your head and you worked, you were sure to win. Competition created strength, assured excellence. The Kennedy children were in constant competition. It was an essential part of their upbringing. They were taught to rely on one another, but also on themselves. Joe Jr., with his dad so often away, was almost a surrogate father. But he and his mother worked within guidelines set by the father. Loyalty to the family, allegiance to one another, respect for, but not fear of those above. Joe Jr. was the star of the family, and he patterned himself on his father. His ambitions, his conservative views, his pugnacious personality. He was bright, he was determined. He sometimes boasted that if his dad didn't precede him to the White House, he, Joe Jr., would be the first Catholic president. It was now the latter part of 1938, no time for personal plans. Hitler was becoming more and more menacing. Each day brought new threats of war. In England, Prime Minister Chamberlain was convinced that war could be avoided. He said that Hitler, despite his ruthlessness, was a man to be relied upon when he had given his word. This was a policy of appeasement. Ambassador Kennedy, influenced by Chamberlain, agreed with this policy. He also felt that the German war machine could not be beaten. Hitler took Austria, then was handed Czechoslovakia. He threatened Poland. The terrors of Nazi genocide, wanton murder, and destruction became commonplace. It was during this period, while Hitler swallowed up his neighbors, that the ties between Kennedy and Roosevelt became strained. Some Roosevelt advisors thought Joe talked too much.
My Lord Provost, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it may be that we've talked too much about international relationships. It seems that every time I meet somebody now, we spend all of our time discussing the terrible state of the world and the disaster hanging over our heads. Certainly, we hear very little else at public gatherings. In the first place, of course, let us not forget that we still have peace.
The Nazis invaded Poland. England declared war. Kennedy phoned Roosevelt at 4 a.m. in Washington, awakening the president with the news. Upset and gloomy, he was predicting chaos and anarchy, no matter who won. Kennedy's isolationist views had put him on the wrong side of history and in direct opposition to Roosevelt. His days in London were numbered. Chamberlain was replaced by Churchill. Churchill and FDR maintained direct communication. Ambassador Kennedy, deliberately bypassed, resigned.
I am returning to Washington to report to the President. I leave England at this time with real regret. When I went to school, we were taught that the great courage of the world was Spartan courage. But your exhibition will certainly earn you a great page in history, and we'll have it talked about for centuries to come. British courage. My hat's off to you.
Despite bad feeling, Kennedy returned home in time to endorse FDR for the third term. But he still defended his own views.
A label used as a smear against certain citizens who favor keeping America out of war is the word appeaser. I have been called one. And here is my answer. If by that word, now possessed of hateful implications, it is charged that I advocate a deal with the dictators contrary to the British desires, or that I advocate placing any trust or confidence in their promises, the charge is false and malicious. If I am called an appeaser because I oppose the entrance of this country into the present war, I cheerfully plead guilty. And so must every one of you who want to keep America out of this war.
Kennedy had many reasons for opposing the war. Two important ones were his eldest sons. Then came Pearl Harbor. His sons enlisted. Kennedy reversed his position. He fired off a telegram to Washington offering his services. But Roosevelt had no place for Joe Kennedy.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
Kennedy's public life had come to an abrupt halt. But the dream remained, his sons remained. It wasn't the end, it was just a setback. His son Joe would go off to fly dangerous missions. Son Jack to the Pacific, commander of a PT boat. Courage became a Kennedy trademark. The greater the danger, the more Jack and Joe offered themselves. Then word came that Jack was missing. 2 weeks later, he was found, alive, on an island, and soon he was home, a war hero. Joe Jr. volunteered for a dangerous mission. It failed. Joe Kennedy had lost his first son. The plane, full of explosives, had blown up shortly after takeoff. But Jack was safe. The war ended. Jack wasn't sure what he wanted to do. He considered writing, but politics attracted him also. It was a way of doing something about the world. His father helped him decide. He ran for Congress. As Joe put it, I got Jack into politics. Joe Jr. was dead. It was Jack's responsibility to run. He didn't want to. Felt he didn't have the ability. But I told him he had to. It was like being drafted, Jack explained. My father wanted his eldest son in politics. You know my father. And Jack grew in the role. By now, Joe Kennedy himself was back in public life, working on a commission to revamp the federal government. In his 6 years as a congressman, Jack's politics were basically conservative. He was anti-communist, an advocate of the status quo. He occasionally showed his toughness and independence. In one case, he fought the American Legion for their opposition to a low-cost housing project in a highly sensitive political issue. Building his image with care, he wanted to be more than a congressman. Henry Cabot Lodge was running for re-election to the Senate from Massachusetts. The Kennedys thought he could be beaten. Lodge, confident of his own election, would be running the Eisenhower campaign.
As we approach the Republican National Convention, it becomes increasingly apparent each day that Eisenhower will be overwhelmingly nominated on an early ballot. If I were guessing, I would say the second or third. One thing I will flatly predict now.
Here was an opportunity for Jack to become a national figure and to beat out the elite of Boston, the Cabots and the Lodges. As Lodge played national politics, Kennedy zeroed in on the local issues. But things were not going well. The polls showed Lodge ahead. A strong hand was needed, one that could handle all the elements, including Joe Sr., whose old political cronies were out of touch with the times. The obvious man to take over was Bobby. He gave up his job in the Justice Department to run the campaign. Working tirelessly with consummate skill, they built a new kind of political organization flooded with youth and vitality. Soon, the tide turned. On the national level, Eisenhower was enchanting the voters. Lodge was right there beside him, listening to the cheers. Ike was headed for the White House, but Lodge was headed for disaster. Jack Kennedy had become a relentless campaigner. Each day, he looked more and more the winner. Each Kennedy, a reporter wrote, takes pride in the achievement of the others. This was a tremendous asset. Yet one man troubled the Kennedys and millions of other Americans for different reasons. Joe McCarthy, junior senator from Wisconsin, a political opportunist who capitalized on fears of communism. Professor Owen Lattimore spoke out against McCarthy and his methods.
That these innuendos have had on the success of my mission and the foreign policy of the United States. I therefore conclude that Senator McCarthy's charges and insinuations are not only false, but utterly irresponsible, and under the circumstances reveal a shocking disregard for the interests of our country.
That's what he was to some, yet to others he was a hero. But for a politician, no matter which side you were on, McCarthy was no man to ignore, no man to cross.
For failure to answer the questions that have been propounded to us.
If Irish Catholic McCarthy spoke for Lodge, Boston Irish Catholics might just listen. Joe Kennedy considered McCarthy a friend. McCarthy had dated his daughter Eunice, employed Bobby. Kennedy had contributed to McCarthy campaigns. He asked Joe McCarthy to please stay out of Massachusetts. He did.
My brother Bobby, who managed the campaign, perhaps he could give us some idea, more up to date, of what the final figures were.
Well, I think that from what we got up to about 20 minutes ago, that you were winning by about 70,000, and there was about 100,000 more votes to come in, and I think that plurality will remain.
That's out of about 2,250,000.
Yeah. So I think that's about 5% of the vote.
Good, fine. Well, I guess you're glad it's over, aren't you, Bobby?
I am, Jack.
The distance between Boston and the White House had shrunk significantly, and the lodges had been set back. It was a double victory. The following year, Jack married. He had met Jackie before the 1952 campaign, but the plans were kept secret. Jack was getting grand publicity as Washington's most eligible bachelor. National magazines competed to feature him on their covers. The announcement of their engagement was postponed so as not to spoil a cover story. Soon, Jackie was part of the Kennedy clan, and she became her own kind of story.
We went to Acapulco, Mexico.
Do any fishing?
Yes, my husband caught a 10-foot sailfish, which he has in his office.
A real prize catch. Did you help him haul it in?
Well, not really, but I was in the boat. All I did was pour water on him.
You poured water on him?
Yes.
You say him, you mean the fish?
Well, no,
my
husband.
On your husband?
Because it was so hot in that boiling sun, and he had to fight the fish for about 3 hours. So I just stayed there pouring water on him.
Jack was becoming a national figure. He backed Adlai Stevenson for the Democratic presidential nomination. Stevenson, recently divorced, felt a Catholic spokesman would be useful. He also wanted an up-and-coming young Democrat. He chose Jack to make the nominating speech. The 1956 convention brought real prominence.
Fellow delegates, I give you the man from Libertyville, the next Democratic nominee, and our next President of the United States, Adlai E. Stevenson.
At this point, Jack made a wrong move. Adlai Stevenson threw the choice of his vice president to the convention. Jack jumped for it, against his father's advice, and he missed. Joe Kennedy thought Adlai couldn't win and didn't want the defeat blamed on Jack. Jack was disheartened.
Mr. Chairman, with thanks to this great free democratic convention, I request that my name be withdrawn in favor of my colleague, Senator Estes Kefauver.
Hello.
Surprise.
He didn't like losing, but in the process, he had tested himself on the national scene and set his aim directly on the presidency.
Ladies and gentlemen of this convention, I want to take this opportunity first to express my appreciation to Democrats from all parts of the country, north and south, east and west, who have been so generous and kind to me this afternoon.
The following year, his daughter Caroline was born. The baptism was a public event. Then Jack ran for re-election to the Senate. As usual, the family was there.
At home with the Kennedys. An informal visit with the family of Senator John F. Kennedy. Mrs. Joseph P. Kennedy.
Good morning, friends. 6 years ago, when my son Jack was a candidate for the Senate, we had this little half hour on television. Many of you, most of you I think, seem to have enjoyed it. And so we arranged to have it again this year. Of course, there have been a great many changes in the family. The girls who helped so much before have been married and have children of their own. And so they have not been able to help Jack as much. But we have a charming addition in the person of Jacqueline, Jack's wife, who has been campaigning with him during the last few months and whom I know many of you have met. Won't you tell us, Jacqueline, a little about your experiences?
I've enjoyed campaigning so much, Mrs. Kennedy. Since September 15th, Jack and I have been traveling through the state trying to meet as many people as we can. Your youngest son, Teddy, who, as you know, is campaign manager, set up the schedule for us last summer, and now he joins us whenever he can get away from law school on weekends. We visited 184 communities, and I think slept in nearly every city in Massachusetts. And we must have shaken hands with nearly everyone in Massachusetts, too.
Well, congratulations, Jackie. And congratulations to Jack that he found a wife who has so enjoyed the campaign. Of course, with us it was a little different because we were born into a political atmosphere. But with you, it was quite a new experience.
I know. Jack has been ungallant enough to say in speeches that you've been campaigning for 65 years. I realize, of course, that he refers to Grandpa Fitzgerald carrying you around in his arms when he was mayor and you were a tiny baby.
Well, that is not quite true, because in those days, of course, the women did not have the vote.
First question is, how many babies did you kiss in this campaign? Well, I didn't kiss enough, I guess, but I did manage to. There didn't seem to be much desire on their part, but in any case, we saw a lot of mothers whose hands we shook in.
The publicity was reaching the people and the politicians,
You are a Democrat,
but there were hurdles on the way to the presidency. Jack's youth, his inexperience, and he was a Catholic. No Catholic had ever been elected president. The liberal wing of the party felt nagging doubts about him. Jack's liberalism seemed too recent. But as Jack said, Hubert's too liberal and Lyndon is a Southerner and less liberal than I. We all have handicaps. Maybe this is the time. All the Kennedys were enthusiastic. Joe Kennedy enjoyed the action too, though he had to stay in the background while helping to push his son to the presidency. He explained privately, we're going to sell Jack like soap flakes. As early as 1957, he was in New York lining up political bosses. He called Chicago Mayor Daley. Kennedy had vast holdings in Chicago. Daley signed up. And the candidate, once considered a poor speaker, began to show the rhetoric and style that would stir men's souls.
The Eisenhower Peace and Prosperity conceals a dangerous attrition
a period of stagnation and status quo, while America becomes second best in all of the vital things that count. And while they talk about prosperity, it is an abundance of courage that we need, and not merely of goods. We have the most gadgets and the most gimmicks and the longest tail fins and the biggest television sets in our history. But we also have the worst slums, the most crowded schools, and the greatest erosion of our national resources and national will that we've ever had. In short, I believe that our party and the time have met. We, the Democratic Party, has its greatest opportunity and responsibility in all of its long history. For it is a time of decision, a time of leadership. It is, my fellow Democrats, a time for greatness.
Let's make this number 5 for April 5 and victory on April 5. And meanwhile, we'll sing Old the Man from Minnesota. He's for you and you and you. Fights for all the people, not for just a few. On the farm, and get him applause there, Miles.
Jack had to enter the primaries to prove his vote-getting ability, and that route was blocked in Wisconsin by Hubert Horatio Humphrey.
Is the very best man for all. So let's all march together. And on election day,
everyone is voting for Jack, 'cause he's got what all the rest lack. Everyone wants to back Jack. Jack is on the right track, 'cause he's got high hopes. He's got high hopes.
This was Humphrey's backyard, full of farmers he had helped for years. A Humphrey victory here would be a major blow to Kennedy's campaign, if not the end. But there was no other way. The convention delegates, the party pros, and the liberals all had to know Jack Kennedy was a candidate who could win.
I do believe it is, because I think that if I were unsuccessful here, I think it would be very difficult to be nominated. And I think if we win here, I think we'll be in a stronger position.